Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabardi. Today is Thursday, August 8th, and today we are going to be diving into the latest updates on the Brandon Aiyuk trade situation. We talked about the news earlier this week that the 49ers had some trade frameworks in place to move the star wide receiver. It's quieted down a little bit since then, but I just want to sort of evaluate the actual landing spots for Brandon Aiyuk because it sounds like a lot of this is on him for where he would want to end up. So I want to talk about what Aiyuk would look like in these different situations, such as a Cleveland or a Pittsburgh, and talk about why he eliminated the Patriots from that list as well. So we'll talk about that. We're going to be continuing to preview the seasons for all 32 NFL teams. Today we have the Philadelphia Eagles. Obviously, just yesterday, the story dropped about the disconnect between head coach Nick Sirianni and their quarterback Jalen Hurts. So we will talk about what impact that could have on their season and overall some of the biggest offseason transactions that could impact how they perform this year. Then we are going to be just looking ahead a little bit to tonight's preseason games against the Patriots and the Panthers and the Giants versus the Lions. Just talking about key players to watch from both of those games. Obviously just a preseason game, but still I think are going to be a number of things that will be interesting to key in on in both of those matchups. And then in the latter half of the show, I'm going to talk about the report that the Golden State Warriors were supposedly not quite as in on a Lauri Markkanen trade as it was once initially thought because of their hesitancy to trade Brandon Pajemski. So I have some thoughts on whether or not that is smart thinking on their part. And then finally, we'll be giving some main takeaways from the series between the Boston Red Sox and the Kansas City Royals. But before we get into all of that, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To any of our viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports. And if you would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker. That is gsmcpodcast.net. Anything would be greatly appreciated there. We are probably 24 plus hours now going on no updates on the Brandon Aiyuk front. It's been one of the number one storylines in the NFL this entire offseason is, will Brandon Aiyuk be traded? And for the longest time, I have been pretty adamant that I don't think that is going to be the case, that the 49ers have their focus set right now on winning the Super Bowl, and Brandon Aiyuk being on the roster, even if he is a little bit disgruntled, even if the future is a little bit cloudy, that his presence in San Francisco is just better for the team. So that I didn't think that they were going to make a trade, but earlier this week, there were reports from NBC Sports that the 49ers have a trade framework in place with both the Patriots and the Browns for an Aiyuk deal. And the reporting at the time additionally was that really the 49ers were just waiting on Brandon Aiyuk to figure out what the contract looks like there and whether or not he wants to play there long term. And considering that was sort of the kicker that we were waiting on and we haven't gotten any updates since then, kind of feels like Brandon Aiyuk isn't necessarily sold on either situation. Now, the reports have already come out that the Patriots are no longer pursuing an Aiyuk trade, again, because Aiyuk wasn't looking forward to playing with the Patriots. They were one of the two teams, it was them and the Browns, for having this framework, and I can't necessarily blame Aiyuk for not wanting to play in New England. You look at specifically on that offensive side of the ball, there are a lot of question marks, and this is a work in progress. at the offensive line is objectively bad, and you don't feel like, at least I don't personally feel like, there is all that much upside for a short-term solution. Made a couple changes this offseason, but still is probably going to be one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL this upcoming season. The quarterback situation is probably what Aiyuk is most focused on, and there aren't a ton of certainties there either. Jacoby Brissett is going to be the week 1 starter for New England, and I think that he's going to be a solid option for however long he is at the helm there. But Brissett on just a 1-year deal. The clear plan is for Drake May, who the Patriots took with that 3rd overall pick, that he is eventually going to be the successor and the team's franchise quarterback, but it's not like the reporting around May in training camp has been all that positive. And, either one of those options in Brissett or May, Aiyuk probably isn't sitting here feeling like either one of those options are going to be even, in the top 16, the top 50% of the league for this upcoming season. So that's definitely a concern. And their offense has a lot of issues. I will say this, people really talk down on their wide receiver core, which is fair. It is very underwhelming as things currently stand. But I feel pretty adamant that if this receiving core were to get a legitimate number 1 guy, then we'd be looking at this entirely differently. Because I think that Kendrick Bourne is a solid number 2 wide receiver. He's been very effective when he's played. Demario Douglas, 6th-round rookie last year, so isn't exactly on a ton of people's radars, but he looked really impressive. Looks like he could be a slot guy for the future as long as he can stay healthy. He was dealing with a bunch of injuries throughout the course of the year as well. You have a good tight end in Hunter Henry. If you were to add Brandon Aiyuk to that Patriots wide receiver core, I just don't think it's seen as the worst in the league, which is sort of the common reputation right now. And the Patriots were willing to, at least the reports were that the Patriots were willing to give Brandon Aiyuk top 5 wide receiver money. Now, obviously, the fact that Aiyuk is saying no to the Patriots, it's far more about the playing system than it is the money itself. But that does sort of delve into a further conversation of what is it that Brandon Aiyuk is hoping for. Because you look at his current situation in San Francisco, and he has a golden opportunity to win. And while he's not necessarily the undisputed number 1 option, there are so many mouths to feed between Deebo Samuel, Brandon Aiyuk, George Kittle, and Christian McCaffrey. But he knows that he has a great chance to go and win a Super Bowl this year and be in a high-octane offense. So the fact that he is sort of being so vocal as things currently stand in that situation where he knows he could play out the season, hit free agency next year, and probably get that top 5 to 10 wide receiver money. And the fact that he is so disgruntled in San Francisco, now there is a very good chance that it's partially due to just being fed up with the negotiation process and that he feels slighted and disrespected by San Francisco. But I think that, on one side you have him turning down pure financials in New England, and in terms of play style and winning and competency on the offensive side around him, he has a great opportunity in San Francisco as well. So I am really curious what Aiyuk is looking at during this negotiation process and talking about what he wants. The other teams that are involved here are the Cleveland Browns, and supposedly the Pittsburgh Steelers have reinserted themselves into the conversation during that initial report about the framework that the 49ers had turned the Steelers away because they weren't willing to give up the compensation that the 49ers were looking for. So I kind of felt like this Browns deal was kind of the obvious move, that Cleveland would trade Amari Cooper and a collection of other draft picks to acquire Aiyuk. They get their long-term wide receiver one. Amari Cooper, still a very capable receiver, but now on the other side of 30, they feel like they want to sort of reset the market a little bit, have their new guy get younger, and have that top-end talent for years to come to put alongside Deshaun Watson. Now, I'd be curious to hear what Aiyuk and what really any of the wide receivers currently in the NFL, where their stance is on Deshaun Watson as things currently stand. Because obviously Watson, you take all of the off-the-field stuff out of the conversation, for starters, Watson has been very disappointing since he's taken over. Now, very disappointing considering the fact that he got a fully guaranteed contract for as much as he's getting paid. So he's definitely not lived up to that contract. But I do think that if he can stay on the field, he can be somewhere around that, middle of the pack quarterback, which again is obviously a disappointment when it comes to trying to justify the contract that they gave out. I just don't know if that's ever going to be a possibility again. But he's locked in for a number of years to come. Cleveland is probably going to try and squeeze everything they can out of that contract. So Aiyuk, I would think, would feel like there's going to be some sort of stability at the quarterback position. Now, again, I can understand the drawbacks with that as well. Watson, it's hard to ignore everything that went on off the field. Last year, there were some questions about his leadership and the playing through injuries. Now, he ended up suffering that season-ending injury, so I don't know if those conversations were ever really fair in the first place. But, it does feel like there is a plan for the Browns for the next few years at quarterback. And, we'll have to see how that ages with Deshaun Watson, but it seems like there's going to be stability at the position. There's a number of other different weapons on that offense as well. You look at David Njoku from the tight end position, Nick Chubb, if he can return to the version of himself that we saw prior, one of the best running backs in the league, if not the best. I think that him and Christian McCaffrey were sort of in their own stratosphere at the time of Chubb's injury last season in week 2. So a lot of talent on that Cleveland roster, and I feel like that's somewhere where Aiyuk could sort of slide into. And then the other team that is reportedly still in the mix is the Pittsburgh Steelers, where I think that it is really messy in terms of what the long-term plan looks like there. Russell Wilson and Justin Fields make up their quarterback room at the moment. There's no guarantees either one of them are in Pittsburgh next season. And the early reporting on training camp has been that Russell Wilson is the projected week 1 starter. I think that internally for Pittsburgh, I think that they are hoping that Justin Fields sort of wins that job and that they have a chance to have a franchise quarterback in Fields. We'll see about that. I forget who made the point. It might have been someone on the NFL Ringer show, so apologies, not trying to plagiarize here, but I did hear a little bit of an interesting talking point about the Steelers had signed Russell Wilson to a deal in free agency first and then made the trade for Justin Fields when it was sort of staring them in the face and all they had to give up was a 6th round pick. That they probably feel like they have a little bit of obligation to not go back on their word with Russell Wilson, but I do feel like Fields is sort of the better option for Pittsburgh. But even with that being said, there's no guarantee that works out either. So I think it's just a very interesting conversation. The Steelers would have to up their package according to the reporting early on in this contract negotiation. I don't really know, considering the fact that the idea was that in return the 49ers would get a veteran wide receiver and draft compensation. I'm not sure if the Steelers necessarily have that vet that the 49ers would be looking for that they could fully utilize for this upcoming season. They've had a lot of turnover in their receiver room the past couple years. Their wide receiver 1 right now is George Pickens. Now maybe you look to a Van Jefferson, who's definitely a veteran. I don't know if he's high end necessarily, but I think that maybe a Van Jefferson deal with some picks could be what the 49ers are looking for, but still, I'm not sure if that's going to be enough there, and we're not sure if Aiyuk wants to end up in Pittsburgh either. It sounds like Aiyuk really wants to play with Jaden Daniels in Washington, but Washington was the one who removed themselves from the conversation, and the 49ers, because the 49ers were asking for more than the Commanders were willing to give up, but from the 49ers perspective, they're not really looking to hand out any favors to Aiyuk or Washington, where you're under contract right now for the 49ers. They're trying to win a Super Bowl. As much as they would like to, best facilitate a deal that results in a win-win, they have some pretty big stakes on the line right now this year. We've talked at length about the fact that their financial clock is ticking a little bit, waiting for that Brock Purdy contract to eventually come in and sort of reorient the financial structure of the team. So, I don't know. I'm sort of leaning back into my initial thought that this deal isn't going to be done, but I'm surprised that we are still talking about it this late into the offseason with preseason starting. So let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section, where you would want to see him end up. But I think that he's going to end up playing out the season in San Francisco and then make a big splash move in free agency next year. But we are going to be now previewing the upcoming season for the Philadelphia Eagles, who had some noisy dysfunction voiced out by ESPN just yesterday in the disconnect between head coach Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts. So I want to talk about how that could impact this upcoming season, talk about their key off-season moves, and ultimately dive into their schedule and predict their regular season records. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, no, this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits some losing shit. A stupid myth, you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be previewing the upcoming season for the Philadelphia Eagles. Just within these past couple days, we've heard a lot out of the Philadelphia locker room in regards to the relationship between Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts, that Sirianni even stood up in front of the locker room within the past week or so and took full accountability for last season and, admitted to the fact that he did some things that harmed the overall vibes of that locker room, his resistance to change on the offensive side of the ball when Jalen Hurts and then offensive coordinator Brian Johnson were trying to evolve as an offense. Nick Sirianni pushed back, and it led to a little bit of a tension between Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni. But I do think that this is something that with Sirianni, it's been a very loud offseason just in terms of there were a surprising amount of people that were calling for Sirianni's job just one season after he led the Eagles to the Super Bowl. And the NFC is still wide open, I would argue, and that the Eagles have a very talented roster to go through some sort of massive philosophy shakeup could be detrimental for the Eagles, who feel like they still have a good chance to make it back to the Super Bowl and actually prevail this time. So I think that little bit of a humbling moment for Nick Sirianni is going to be enough to help propel the Eagles to get on to better terms and focus on this upcoming season where, like I just mentioned, I think they have a very good chance. Now, they lost a couple of their key leaders as well to sort of add on to the emotional stress that has been going on behind the scenes in Philadelphia. Both Jason Kelce and Fletcher Cox, two of their longtime captains, part of their 2017 Super Bowl win, they both retired this offseason, so they are going to need to sort of, I wouldn't say find a new identity, but they're going to need to get bigger contributions from some of their other veterans, and having the likes of Sirianni and Hurts get on the same page so that the locker room can actually stay together in pursuit of this second Super Bowl ring. Now, part of it, when you talk about their chances for the upcoming season, has to be about the talent of, I would say, primarily the offensive side of the ball. It's just a unit that we all feel great about, have felt very good about, I would say. I know that Jalen Hurts does still have his doubters to some degree, but this is a very talented offense, and they add Saquon Barkley in the offseason to try and reestablish the run game a little bit, because last year we did see a little bit of fall off from their rushing attack. You look at the numbers for them last year, they were still 8th in the NFL in rush yards per game, but I do think that a lot of their rushing attack came in the first couple weeks when DeAndre Swift, who was their offseason acquisition last year at the running back position, he was playing really well, and then as the year went on, he just sort of seemed to be, and I'm not fully blaming him, but the rush attack was less and less reliable as the season went on. So being able to bring in Saquon, which is a clear upgrade in my opinion, is definitely a big positive for the Eagles offense next season. And yes, losing Jason Kelce, I mean, sort of one of the biggest things that at least comes to mind when you talk about that is, well, what about the tush push? Because it was this unstoppable play for a couple of years now, so much so that other NFL teams were arguing that it's unfair and were trying to ban it to get it out of the rule book, which was a little bit ridiculous in my opinion. But you know, they are going to have a new look at center. Cam Jurgens is moving over to the center position, and it is going to be Tyler Steen stepping up, at least as of now, to take over the starting right goal position. I don't know if we have an official week 1 starter that's out there yet. Steen, though, is headed into his second season, and across the board, I mean, this is still a very talented offensive line. You're returning the majority of your starters. You feel good about your tackle positions, and Landon Dickerson is also a Pro Bowl, All-Pro caliber guard as well. So I feel good enough about their offensive line that I don't think it should be an issue for them. Plus the fact that they just re-upped new deals for A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith during the offseason. They get Dallas Goedert back, who was dealing with injuries for a lot of the 2023 season, that I think they should be in really good position to once again be one of the top units in the NFL. It's going to come down to Jalen Hurts, though, as well, where you look at where they struggled the most was the passing game last year, and Jalen Hurts was clearly dealing with a knee injury that he was able to play through it, but it wasn't the same version of Jalen Hurts that we've seen in the past. Again, when you talk about the dysfunction, the passing game is sort of where Sirianni and Hurts weren't seeing eye to eye last year. That I think that the article that was released from Tim McMahon and Jeremy Fowler yesterday talked about how they felt like the Eagles were a little bit too reliant on vertical routes. So seeing what other sort of different types of play concepts they add in will be interesting to see there. There was a little bit of dysfunction at times with A.J. Brown being unhappy, but still one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, and I definitely have faith in the Eagles offense as a whole. Now, defensively, they were really struggling last year. You look at, they lost their two top tacklers from the 2023 Super Bowl season, or 2022 Super Bowl season, and that linebacker group just did not live up to expectations, in large part because of the fact that they had been spending first-round draft capital on linebackers in each of the past two seasons, drafting Nakobe Dean and Nolan Smith, and neither one of them really translated in the way that they were hoping for. That it was a very weak linebacker group. The secondary was also sort of meh, but they definitely had an intention this offseason to address that. Brought in some key pieces. They re-signed C.J. Gardner-Johnson, who was with the Eagles for their Super Bowl appearance a couple years ago, spent 1 year in Detroit, but he's back in Philly now. Devin White, who was once a big part of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers Super Bowl win a handful of years ago in 2020, former All-Pro player, is coming off of probably the worst season of his career, so we'll see whether or not, I mean, he's still just 26 years old, I believe, so still a very good chance that, physically he has it left in him, but definitely a position of need for the Eagles this offseason, bringing in Devin White, and we'll see how he can produce there. And then they add Bryce Huff to the picture as well from the Jets, who was looking to take on a bigger role with Philly this upcoming year, and he's going to have his opportunities. I think that the linebacking core is really interesting because you look at the fact that there's a lot of very notable games. Like I just mentioned, you bring in Huff and Devin White, and Nolan Smith and Nakobe Dean as first-round picks in the past couple years. They add Jeremiah Trotter Jr. in the draft this year. I know a lot of people are very low on him. I thought he was a good player at Clemson. We'll have to see how it translates. But, and you look at the stats from last year, and they were, in that bottom tier in the majority of categories, really outside of their run defense. 31st in pass, 30th in scoring. I mean, this Eagles defense was at such a crossroads last year that they promoted Matt Patricia to their play caller in the middle of the season, and it was just overall a mess. Now, they cleaned the slate on both their offensive and defensive coordinators. Kellen Moore now taking over the offense. Vic Fangio is now the defensive coordinator for the Eagles, so I do think it was upgrades at each of those positions. Moore and Fangio, I would say, are a little bit, in the same category of they have at times been very highly regarded as some of the best coordinators at their position, but also when we put them in those conversations, we've seen regression as well. Obviously, Fangio, he never saw eye to eye with the Miami defense, so that's why he sort of needed a change of scenery. Miami themselves wanted to switch things up there, so he lands in Philly, has a little bit of an edge, chip on his shoulder, maybe a little bit of an edge that I think it can play in well with the team that Sirianni is trying to go out there and coach. And there should be, I would say, talent. Now, you look in their secondary, there's definitely a number of older players, which can, you can sort of spin it however way you want. Experience is a good thing, but especially in the secondary, I feel like a lot of the time we can see the physical deterioration of cornerback is probably, in my opinion, one of the most underrated, difficult positions to play in sports. So you look at who they currently have right now. It's Darius Slay, who now at this point, he is 33 years old. You bring in a CJ Gardner-Johnson, who's a little bit on the older side as well. And then the other players you are relying on, Avonte Maddox, I believe he suffered an injury last season, but, a young player that could provide a little bit of promise. Maybe Keely Ringo, a 4th-round pick a couple years ago, you could also put in that category. James Bradbury is also available, but, in his age 30-plus season. And I am really interested to see the development of Quinion Mitchell, who they drafted in the 1st round this past year. And I think it was a great pick for them. Obviously, Mitchell playing at Toledo, I believe it was, didn't have quite as many eyes on him while he was in college, but he was a standout stud really from day one of the Senior Bowl, and he has a ton of talent, so I'll be curious to see, how much runway he gets in his rookie season, because the Eagles are going to have a lot of pressure, I would say, in terms of team success this upcoming season. Looking at their schedule, I think it's actually pretty difficult. Now, Sharp Football Analysis, which they do their strength of schedule based off of Vegas win totals for each of their opponents this season. So I think it's a very reliable way to go about it. But they have the Eagles with the 9th easiest schedule in the NFL. I do think that it's going to be a little bit more difficult than that. You look at week 1, playing a game in Brazil against the Packers. That's almost a coin flip, considering the Packers are A, good team, and B, you're playing the first game ever in Brazil, so no home field advantage. It's going to be a very unique setting. So that's how they begin their season. And I think that the first half of their schedule could be a little bit in that 500 conversation. Now, they play the NFC South. It definitely depends on how you evaluate them. I don't think that the NFC South is a particularly strong division, so you would think that they could probably clean up on a lot of those games, but at New Orleans, at Tampa Bay, I don't think that those are total rollover spots there, and some physical teams in that as well. Interesting there. An early bye week, you come out and you play the Cleveland Browns, who are another physical in the trenches team. So I think there's a good chance the Eagles could be sitting around 500 about halfway through the year. But after that game against the Ravens in Baltimore in week 13, I think things can sort of ease up for the Eagles a little bit in their final stretch to the playoffs. 4 of 5 games at home. You're playing a few divisional rivals in there, so I'm not going to say those are easy wins necessarily. The NFC East, those are always very good matchups, but I think that there's a lot of very winnable games outside of the Cowboys at home. I think that the Eagles can, pretty confidently win 4 of their last 5 games. But overall here, the Eagles win total, or according to Vegas, is sitting at 10.5. I do have them going over, and I think that, like I said, things could get out to a little bit of a slow start, but even so, I think that the Eagles are going to be able to have a bounce back year. Even last season when they didn't look good, and obviously it's unfair to view it in this way, last year looked really bad, and they still started the season 10-1. So even if they do have their share of bumps, I expect them to be a double-digit win team, and I do think that they're going to be in the playoff race. Looking how that stacks up to the rest of the NFL that we've previewed so far, I do think that I'd give a slight edge to the Cowboys for winning the regular season division title. Obviously, playoffs is a whole different conversation, and we can only project so much as we're sitting here in early August. I don't want to, put myself at the mercy of, having these thrown back in my face, but I think both the Cowboys and the Eagles are going to churn out very good seasons, and I think both of them are going to be in the playoffs and have a pretty good chance to match up against one another. So let me know what your expectations are for the Eagles this upcoming season, and tomorrow we'll be finishing off our NFC East coverage by diving into the Washington Commanders. So again, let us know your thoughts in the comment section on the upcoming season for the Eagles, but we are now going to be taking our next break here, and when we come back on the other side, I want to talk about the key players to be keying in on in tonight's preseason games. Yes, it is still the preseason, but even last week with the Hall of Fame game, we got some key offensive starters for the Houston Texans, and I think that there are a number of names that will be very interesting to watch tonight. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, and we're now going to be looking at tonight's upcoming preseason games in the NFL. Now, obviously, the preseason, you can't take all too much out of it necessarily or anything like that, but I do think that it is really interesting to get our first glances at some of the key players, and I think there are going to be a number of notable things to tune into tonight with both of these games. And specifically, I'm looking at the Patriots versus Panthers game. Now, pretty disappointing that we aren't going to get to see Bryce Young play at all for the Carolina Panthers, which I don't feel great about that decision. I understand it's quarterback one. Bryce faced a ton of scrutiny last season. I do think that the majority of people that watched the NFL were at least understanding of what was going on in Carolina, that Bryce was dealing with a lot of incompetent play around him as well. So even if he was good, it was never going to be a good offensive product for the Panthers last year. And the fact that CJ Stroud, of course, was lighting the world on fire after being taken right after him definitely didn't do him any favors either. So, Panthers, I can't imagine we're going to see all too many, key players for them. If I were to ask anything of the Panthers, I would be really interested to look specifically at some of their wide receivers. Jonathan Mingo had a very disappointing rookie season last year. After taking him with the 39th overall pick, it seemed like Mingo was supposed to emerge as the number one wide receiver for Bryce Young moving forward here, but it did not end up being the case. He had a bad season. So I hope that he gets some runway and that he can find his way to look a little bit more comfortable. I think that Andy Dalton's going to start the game for the Panthers at quarterback. I'm not 100% sure on that. I think that Dalton can run a competent offense, so he would get Mingo some types of looks. Xavier Legette, also one of my favorite wide receivers from this past draft out of South Carolina. They ended up taking him. Forget if they traded back up into the end of the first round or if it was early in the second round. It was with pick 32. So yeah, literally the last pick of the first round. The Panthers did just trade back up into and ended up taking him there. So I'm looking at those top 2 wide receivers, not going to be top 2 in terms of targets probably this year for the Panthers, but some of these younger receivers for the Panthers to see if any one of them can emerge as a go-to guy that Bryce Young is desperately going to need as he tries to change the momentum on what his reputation in the league is. One other player that I'm definitely looking forward to seeing play as well is Jatavion Sanders, who the Panthers took in the 4th round of this past year's draft. He was drafted out of Texas, so I do think that, that's going to be an interesting name to tune into as well. We have a comment here from Hawaiian50 saying, Aloha. Can't imagine he's in Hawaii necessarily if he's a Steelers fan, but hyping up his Steelers, so love to see that. But on the other side of this game between the Patriots and the Panthers, is the Pats, where we're going to see Drake May in tonight's game, which is obviously a big deal. Our first impressions of a top 3 drafted quarterback in NFL action, so it is going to be interesting to see. Now, Jacoby Brissett is going to actually start the game, so we're not exactly sure when exactly we will see May make an appearance in this game, but it sounds like Gerard Mayo has plans to play all 4 of the quarterbacks for New England. Brissett, I think that we sort of already know what the case is there. I am going to be paying attention to see what the identity a little bit of this Patriots team is going to look like under new offensive coordinator in Alex Van Pelt. So we'll see there. But Drake May and Joe Milton are really the top options that I'm looking for personally. Drake May, the reporting hasn't exactly been overly positive for him in training camp, but I don't know if that's necessarily a fair way to go about it, and now he's getting an opportunity to show himself against one of the bottom tier defenses, I would say. Again, it's preseason, so no matter what comes out of this, it's hard to, definitively plant your flag in any take, but I'm definitely looking forward to seeing Drake May. Joe Milton, I'm just sort of waiting. I think he's going to become a preseason darling. He's going to make a throw or two with that incredible arm talent that's going to have a lot of people very excited. I already know Patriots fans sort of in my inner circle that are buying into the Joe Milton hype. I think it would be really cool if he ends up being a good NFL player because of his play style, because of the elite arm talent. I just don't necessarily see it with it. The consistency of, the passing, the accuracy and precision, but we'll see. But I do think he's going to probably have a moment or two of shine in preseason this year. And then for the Patriots as well, this is obviously a rebuilding season for them. Now, Brissett probably going to start for a lot of the year, so it's not like they're going to be trying to lose games necessarily. Brissett gives them the best chance, and they're going to try and establish a real identity. But, for whenever the Patriots are going to be in position to win a playoff game, someday in the next few years, probably going to imagine that a lot of the roster is turned over from then. But the Patriots spent a couple, high-end draft picks on some wide receivers and Jalen Polk and Javon Baker. I'm definitely interested to see both of them, considering I don't know how much playing time they're going to get this year behind what is a very middling wide receiver core, but still, again, they're not going to be overly prioritizing the youth, I don't think, so that's definitely something I'm looking forward to there. I also think that there are a couple defensive names maybe now, especially with Matthew Judon and the holdout situation that's going on there. I'm expecting a big season out of Keon White, so I think that we could see him maybe burst onto the scene a little bit in this game as well. But as for the game between the Giants and the Lions, maybe not quite as much from in a point of getting the first looks at new players, considering the fact that the Panthers and the Patriots are both bad. So this is sort of, they're trying to find themselves, and they're going to be a little bit more willing to play some of their starters a little bit more. The Lions, I can't imagine we are going to give any sort of, looks into what their upcoming season is. They just made the NFC Championship game last year, so they are probably going to just be kind of playing this game as a formality. I'm curious to see if we do get any playing time from Terrion Arnold, who was one of my favorite players in this past year's draft. Out of Alabama, the cornerback. They definitely need a little bit of reinforcements, I'd say, in that secondary. Ines Rakestraw Jr. as well, another one of their draft picks. So I hope that we get some run time from them. Ifeatu Melifonwu, who during the second half of the season really started sort of making a name for himself out of the secondary. I'd be keying in on that group of players for the Lions because it's going to be, I would say, a difference maker for Detroit this upcoming season if they can sort of lock down in that secondary a little bit more than they have in previous seasons. And then last team we're going to be looking at tonight is the Giants. I don't think that there is, to some degree as well, I don't know how many young players I'm dying to see from the Giants. Kind of one of the biggest things I'm looking at is I want to see what Drew Lock looks like in this New York offense. Now, hopefully we get some Malik Neighbors. I would imagine we get minimal, if any, sort of playing time from Neighbors. But Drew Lock is somebody that I just haven't fully been able to quit necessarily just yet. And I do think that the Giants have said that Daniel Jones is going to be the starter, but Drew Lock could end up taking over that starting job, and it would maybe start at least the buzz from the media if Drew Lock is able to go out and play a big game in this one. But again, I think that this is more so just about letting the younger players go. Deonte Banks maybe is a name I'd be looking for the Giants as well. Their first round draft pick last year, I thought showed a lot of potential. I don't know if he's going to be getting all that much playing time, but he is definitely somebody I'd be interested in. Isaiah Simmons, if he is able to find a little bit of a role for himself as well, would be interesting to me. But let me know what you're looking forward to. We do have a couple Steelers fans in the chat right now. Paranormal in the Fern House saying, what's the update with Steelers? I don't know exactly what on that note you'd be referring to there. We did talk about the Brandon Aiyuk situation earlier, that the Steelers are trying to work their way back into the conversations for Aiyuk. It would just be a matter of what would they be willing to give up in return that would actually, benefit the 49ers from a perspective of this season itself. They don't really have the veteran wide receiver you feel like can be a really high-end guy. I did see a tweet from Andrew Filipponi, who works for a radio station 93.7, which is out of Pittsburgh, and he talked about, or he at least tweeted out, the idea of whether or not the 49ers would be trying to get either a Pat Freiermuth or George Pickens out of the Steelers. I don't know if really either of those names make all too much sense. It did definitely intrigue me, him throwing it out there. George Pickens would feel like, to me, a little bit of a lateral move from both sides, where he's going to be eligible for a contract extension after this season. So the 49ers would just sort of be punting the ball down the field a little bit further and have to deal with possibly the same exact situation next offseason. Pat Freiermuth is a good player, and I think that, fully healthy, he's going to be able to have more of an impact. We'll see about what type of quarterback play he actually gets this upcoming season, but I don't know if, that necessarily pushes the needle for the 49ers either, especially behind George Kittle. They haven't traditionally been much of a two tight end system. But that's what I got for you in terms of an update with the Steelers. I'd be happy to answer any sort of specific questions. But we are now going to be taking our next break, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to be switching gears a little bit to the NBA, where I want to discuss the reports that came out about the Golden State Warriors being hesitant to trade for Lauri Markkanen because they considered Brandon Podziemski untouchable. So we will dive into that conversation, but first a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be diving into a storyline that came out of the NBA this morning, that the Warriors, who had been at least linked to Utah Jazz forward Lauri Markkanen for a little bit, that they weren't all in on making a move for Markkanen because the Jazz were asking for too much, which is no surprise in my opinion. Danny Ainge, the way that he conducts business, since he's been a general manager dating back to when he was with the Celtics, that ultimately, he is a pretty tough customer in terms of trying to make deals. But I do feel like this is a situation with the Warriors where I'm not saying definitively they should have made everything happen to get this deal in place, but I feel like the Warriors are definitely facing a little bit of a steeper pressure, and I don't know if there is any move that the Warriors can necessarily make that will automatically make them championship contenders, but they've been playing out this two timelines thing, and it's really hard to balance all of that along with having Steph Curry, who has been a crucial member of your organization. It seems like he's going to be a lifelong Warrior, and that he's at a point where he is still more than capable of winning a Finals MVP if he were given the opportunity. And he's going to play it out on a rebuilding Warriors team for the rest of his career. It doesn't really sit great with me. Now, again, I'm not saying they should have moved absolutely everything to acquire Lauri Markkanen, who now is officially off the table. The deal finally officially came into fruition yesterday. Lauri was signed to a 4-year, $220 million contract extension, and it makes him unmovable for the 2024-25 season. So that is now something that isn't available to them anymore, and it seems like the Warriors are kind of just going to be rolling into next season with what they already have, which isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world, but it was still a play-in tournament team last year, and you can definitely make the argument that if Draymond Green doesn't get himself suspended and have a whole, mini saga that's going on during all of this, that the Klay Thompson factor was definitely a distraction as well. You can talk me into the idea that this core can be better, but I still wouldn't put them even sniffing in the championship contender realm. So I feel like ultimately here, the Warriors, not saying desperate, but they are needing to do something. And the details of the report that came out earlier today were that they weren't all in on a Lauri trade because they considered Brandon Podziemski untouchable and that they were not going to move him, which I feel like that is a little bit of a mistake. Now, I'm saying it's a mistake in terms of Brandon Podziemski should not be an untouchable for a team like the Warriors who feel like they should be in championship contention. I like Brandon Podziemski a lot, and I think that he is one of those younger players that the Warriors have that they could end up utilizing in a championship atmosphere that I don't think he'd get played off a court by any means because of the fact that he has the defense, the hustle, the IQ. He checks a lot of those boxes that definitely play into what the Warriors would envision their identity looks like if they were to make a return to the playoffs. But if that's the case, they gotta, upgrade around the edges first, and sometimes it's gonna cost you to go and make a splash move. For whatever it's worth, we've had some Warriors fans in the chat before, and I would say mostly reasonable fans, but I think that especially any fan of any team values their young players more than the rest of the league does. And I do think that the Warriors fall victim to this a little bit. Like, they have some real trade chips in a Jonathan Kuminga, maybe a Trace Jackson Davis, Brandon Pajemski, Moses Moody. Names that, if you're another team, I would definitely be interested in. But when you're talking about Lauri Markkanen, who was All-Star and Most Improved in 2022-23, was still in that similar conversation last year. He didn't end up being selected to an All-Star team, but he was still definitely in the mix. And for whatever it's worth, if he had the Warriors fan base behind him as opposed to a Jazz team that was, sub 500, I think Lauri would definitely be an all-star once again. But the other issue with the Warriors is they have so many bad contracts on the books, and I'm specifically looking at Andrew Wiggins, who is going to be making $30 million a couple years from now. And, that's a negative trade asset at this point. But also makes up a lot of your salary cap space. Same with Draymond Green, who I would say provides more on the court value, but obviously has all of his shortcomings as well. So it's one of those things where the Warriors, they can be a solid team above 500 in the mix for a play-in tournament spot this upcoming year, 100%. But that's not really what the standard of the Warriors have been. And honestly, if this is the way that they just want to play it out, make sure that they're at least still relevant for the final seasons of Steph Curry's career and not mortgage off your future in a significant way, I can understand, because typically I am a little bit stricter on if this were any other team, Warriors, I'd probably consider, blowing it up a little bit. I think that the other teams in the Western Conference are significantly ahead of them, but it's also, you have Steph Curry on the roster, and he wants to be a lifelong Warrior. He's given you 4 championships, and I totally understand that, when you have a statue guy like that you want to do everything you can to make sure that you have him. So if it means that they're going to be a little bit more on the mediocre side these next couple of years, but just to allow Steph Curry to not be pissed that he is, in Golden State still and all of that, I can see both sides of it, which is typically very anti what my philosophy is. But that being said, I feel like the way that you got to go about this as well is you're going to have to take a swing at some point. And I'm not saying it had to be this Markkanen deal, but I just don't think it is realistic for the Warriors to expect that they're going to be able to land any type of a deal if they are that's going to put them in championship conversations, if they're going to view a guy like Brandon Pajemski as untouchable. I can understand saying that he is a valued piece and that he wants to preserve him as much as possible, but to say we are definitively not trading this player, making him untouchable, when I hear that makes me think that there is not a deal that could possibly be thrown at you that you would be willing to part ways with Pajemski for. And I think that that's malpractice. As much as he is a very promising young player and does fit into, in terms of the young guys, I would probably lean with keeping Podziemski over the likes of Kuminga, Trace Jackson Davis, and Moses Moody. That he would be the number one guy, because I think that he can provide more from you for a win now situation than these other guys, even though I do have a lot of respect for Kuminga as well. That ultimately, I'm not sure what path the Warriors are really trying to go after here, and I think that they are going to, again, kind of need to pick a path, but I don't know if I see that happening either. So, let me know in the comment section what your thoughts were on this entire sort of situation. Is it just too late for the Warriors, or is there still a deal on the table that they can make to try and make things interesting? Because I sort of refuse to believe that this is just totally it, and that the best option for the Warriors is to just be mediocre for years to come. But again, let me know what you think. But we are going to now be taking our final break of the show, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to be diving into the series between the Boston Red Sox and Kansas City Royals, recapping it and giving my biggest takeaways from it. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where we're going to be giving the biggest takeaways from the series between the Boston Red Sox and Kansas City Royals. It was a massive matchup between these two teams, considering where they are both at respectively in the playoff picture, considering the fact that the Royals have the final wild card spot and the Red Sox are right behind them. So the Sox were able to take 2 out of 3 to at least decrease the gap a little bit between the two teams. The Royals are now 1.5 games ahead of the Red Sox, and ultimately it feels like it's been so long since the Red Sox took the first 2 games of a series that it just feels like since the All-Star break, especially, time after time, we're looking at these rubber matches where it's a little bit of, win or go home. Obviously is not the case in the middle of August and July, but it seemed like, for a lot of these, every series win matters for the Red Sox at this point in their season. And it's one of those things, if you're a Red Sox fan, you sort of just have to take it that the Red Sox did end up dropping Game 3, but felt like it was, slightly disappointing considering the fact that you're looking at the Red Sox being in playoff position had they been able to win that Game 3. But overall, I do want to talk about the Red Sox offense because they have been unbelievable since the All-Star break. And I'll say this, I talked about the runners in scoring position, and that is definitely still somewhat of an issue. I do feel like they have been letting down a little bit as of late in terms of being able to actually drive their players in, but they are still at least, giving you very good production as of late, where they have the number 1 OPS in the MLB since the All-Star break. They have the number 1 average. I want to say they have the number 1 runs scored as well. They do, by a margin of 5. So their offense, as much as, yes, it does feel like they let opposing teams off of the hook too often in some of these situations, they still have been very much producing. And that's despite all the talks about not having enough right-handed bats or anything along those lines. The issue for the Red Sox right now, and we've talked about this before, is the fact that their pitching has been very much struggling as of late. And you have a lot of tired arms in that bullpen right now. Not just the bullpen either. The starting rotation, you're looking at Houck and Cutter Crawford, both on career highs in terms of innings pitched. Brian Bayo, I'll have to double check here, but he's probably creeping up there as well. And the fact that Bayo is sort of, one of your veteran guys almost at this point in terms of experience of a full season of pitching worth, goes to tell you a little bit of where they are at. But the Red Sox have the second worst ERA in the MLB since the All-Star break. The only team worse than them is the Chicago White Sox, who are 1-18 in that stretch. So not very good company whatsoever in that department. They are just kind of getting shelled, their starters are, and you see in this series that none of these starts were particularly awful. Now, I would say the worst of the bunch probably came from Cutter Crawford in Game 3, where the home run issue continues to be a massive problem for him, where he's now up to 13 home runs allowed in his past 4 starts. Just no good there whatsoever. Ultimately, it started with the 1 home run. If that was it, could have been fine, but the 4th inning just absolutely blew up on him. He wasn't able to make it through the end there, and you have to feel, some sympathy for him, considering he's sitting in the dugout afterwards with his head in his hands, all pissed off. But 3 2/3 innings pitched for him last night. 5 hits. It was 5 hits, 3 strikeouts. I'm looking for the walk numbers here. 4 walks and 6 earned runs. And some of the walks with the Red Sox, especially lately as well, have just been kind of the worst part, because they have significantly more... They have 62 walks since the All-Star break. That is tied for 7th, so, I guess it's not a disaster. It just feels like the timing of them specifically has been such an issue, and especially when in this series, multiple times it happens, especially in that Game 3, with Bobby Witt Jr., who is hotter than basically anybody on planet Earth right now in the MLB, that you just can't give up those extra opportunities. And ultimately, it's a series win for the Red Sox coming out of Kansas City right now. So again, they did what they needed to, but it still feels like kind of slipped away from them. And they tend to have these, really bad individual innings that end up just putting up runs that the Sox cannot keep up with, and they put themselves into these holes. And to their credit, I think that they have been able to battle back significantly better than we have seen from them in past years, but ultimately, just kind of a mess at times. But that being said, again, it's a series win, so can't be all too negative on it. Masataka Yoshida, on a positive end here, has been unbelievable for them. In Game 1, he had that game where he was 4 of 5 from the field. He was 4 hits and 5 at-bats, had scored 2 runs himself as well. His average has just been continuing to, skyrocket almost over the course of the past few months, where, it was looking horrendous for him for a while there. He had hit just 200 in June, but since then, 333 in July with an 898 OPS so far early on in August, but hitting 320 with an 877 OPS. I mean, Massa definitely, it was a very expensive contract when the Sox signed him. The fact that he doesn't give you any positional value from a defensive perspective hurts them, but as long as he's still able to produce offensively, you can feel good enough about it. And he's been at the center of basically everything the Red Sox offense has been able to do as of late. It's been him, and it's been Rafael Devers, maybe sprinkle in a little bit of Wilyer Abreu. It's interesting because Duran, I mean, feels like Duran isn't playing well lately because he was just so good for so much of the year. Ultimately, he hasn't been bad, and he had the hit of the game in Game 2 to be able to pull that one out. He's hitting 286 in August. Maybe it's just that my expectations for him have risen too high, but, after 3 straight months of hitting over 300, seeing him dip down even this little bit has caught me off guard a little bit, that he doesn't seem to be in the center of everything the Red Sox are doing, but, this is going to, the way that things currently stand right now with the Red Sox, I think that they are going to have to produce at an elite level offensively to hang in the race here. The Royals are a good team. I don't think that Twitter has started calling them the White Sox merchants a little bit. One of my friends texted me the other day a stat about the Royals, and it's that the Royals are 19-4 against the Chicago White Sox and the Detroit Tigers, and they would be now 45-50 along those lines against everybody not named the Tigers or the White Sox. So just kind of a funny stat there. White Sox merchants is just a crazy label. Social media never fails in terms of putting out stupid, labels on teams and players, but I thought that was pretty funny. And I mean, I think it's a lineup that is a little bit top heavy. Obviously, Bobby Witt Jr., I wouldn't dare to put any sort of limitations on what he can do, because again, he is playing like the best baseball player on the planet right now. It's going to possibly end up being a very real race for American League MVP at this point, where it seemed like it was Judge's for the entire season. But if you actually look a little bit closer into it now, obviously Bobby Witt and Aaron Judge playing very different styles and different positions, but Bobby Witt's got a higher WAR than Aaron Judge at this point, 8.1 versus Aaron Judge's 7.9. So it's really the two of them separating themselves from the pack, and it's going to be really interesting to see play there. I think the Royals also have a good starting rotation. Bullpen, though, outside of Urseg, I don't exactly feel great about it. So the Red Sox definitely have their flaws right now, but it's not like these other teams that are in the hunt aren't also without their own struggles. So, I mean, the Red Sox, they're going to need production from their starting pitching at some point soon if they want to have any sort of a chance. It's either that or their offense is going to have to continue to, scorch earth a little bit. And like I said, running their averages with runners in scoring position haven't exactly been great as of late. So you think if maybe they can capitalize a little bit more on those opportunities, that you could even see a little bit of room to grow with their offense. Their key contributors right now are all of the sort of usual suspects in terms of who should be producing runs for the Red Sox right now. It's Devers, it's Massa, it's Abreu. It is, the heart of their lineup, and I think that they're even getting, there's a little bit of depth there possibly as well. I think that Alex Cora's been hitting all the right switches in terms of when to bring guys in for pinch hits. Romy Gonzalez hit a couple home runs, including one off of a pinch hit opportunity. You have, a number of other guys that are producing for you as well, but I'm just not sure how sustainable this offensive reliant team structure is going to be, and whether or not that's actually going to be able to get you to the postseason. So let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. That is all the time we have for today, though. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Be sure to check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. And we will be back tomorrow afternoon, same time as always, 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.